Good morning. Today we begin reading the book of James. James, the writer of the book of James, is believed to be one of Jesus' brothers. You can find reference to him, to Jesus' brother James, in Galatians 1 and 2, in Acts 12, in 1 Corinthians 15. A lot of people assume that it's written by the James and John, the sons of thunder, sons of Zebedee, the two of the first fishermen, that Jesus called to be his disciples. But it's generally accepted that it's written by one of Jesus' brothers. And we find reference to, Jesus' family, his brothers, that he's got, that he wasn't just an only child. He was the firstborn of Mary, but not Mary's only child. And in the Gospels, we can find a place where, Jesus is teaching and a messenger comes in that, your mother and your brothers are waiting outside for you. And Jesus says, well, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? But he did have family members that way. And so this letter is written by a brother of Jesus who became a follower, who became one who believed and accepted Jesus as the Messiah. And you think about that, sometimes, you can read that it says, a prophet is not without honor in his homeland. And oftentimes, if someone has grown up in an area and become a pastor or become whatever, it always doesn't have, quite as much maybe sway or maybe recognition in the home community. They've watched this person grow up. But anyway, Jesus' family did become ardent followers of Jesus and of his ministry, especially his mother Mary. We know that, from at the foot of the cross. And Mary, at the beginning of Jesus' ministry was continuing to encourage him, to begin. And when he turned the water into wine at Cana, that was kind of Mary pushing him to begin. It's time to get going on your call in life. And so James talks about Jesus' call in life. He talks about how we live in our lives in relationship. This letter, it starts out like a letter. It says James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. And then he says to the 12 tribes in the dispersion. So it's a letter opening that way, but it seems to be more filled with little proverbs and nuggets of wisdom and different things than sometimes we would think of a letter. And just briefly about, it says, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion. When the Babylonians conquered Israel, many of the people of Israel, there are 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Jacob that way. But anyway, the 12 tribes of Israel, after this conquest by the Babylonian Empire, the people moved. They didn't remain in Jerusalem and in Israel. They moved out into Samaria and all of the surrounding country. So they were dispersed. It's called the diaspora. If you want to read more about it, if you Bing or Google diaspora, it talks about it and it'll fill you in. But the dispersion basically is an Israelite in the dispersion is any Israelite not living within Jerusalem, within the boundaries of Israel. So this letter is written to all of the Israelites. And not only that, but to you and me as well. And that's another one of the great things of the Bible. So he begins after the introduction, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy. And I said before, we don't like trials. We don't think about trials and troubles as joy. But, he's talking about things of faith, and just to remain strong in our faith that way. In verse 6, he says, but ask in faith, never doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. And the waves, the waters, and the clouds as they go through the sky, they have no control over themselves. The clouds are moved by the wind, the waves are moved by the wind, and sometimes they're just little bitty ripples, and other times they're huge cascading mountains of water that can inflict massive destruction. But so, he's saying, ask in faith. And when we ask in faith, we're grounded in that knowledge that God is there and that God listens through Jesus Christ, and that we're not just tossing something out there into the open air for it to be, blown around any place, but yet we are asking in faith. We're coming to God that way, and knowing that God hears, that we're grounded, in God. And that's, that's one of the things, we've got, just lately we've had some tremendous winds here in North Dakota. And I sit in my living room sometimes and I watch the branches of the trees as they wave in the wind. And you think about the resilience of the tree. The trees are, 40, 50, 60 feet tall, whatever. And some of these little branches are, there's hardly any size to them at all. And yet the wind blows them back and forth. And some of the big, thick branches, there's great big, thick branches that will bend and move in the wind. And it's a part of the resilience of the tree because it's rooted. And that's what we are. We are rooted in our faith, so that when we come to God, we're rooted there, we're grounded there, and we're not shakeable. Even though maybe our head can move around and our hair can blow around in the wind and things like that, we are rooted in our faith in Jesus Christ, and we're solid that way. And we're not tossed about by the wind. There's just lots of little nuggets I got underlined in chapter 1. Let the believer who is lowly boast in being raised up, and the rich in being brought low. I mean, in the eyes of God, we're all the same. It doesn't matter, rich or poor, tall or short, or whatever we may be. We are all the same in God's eyes. And it doesn't make a bit of difference that way. Verse 13, I think, 12 starts out, blessed is anyone who endures temptation, and we all do. I mean, temptation is out there for each and every one of us. 13, though, is, I think, a very important verse. It says, no one when tempted should be saying, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one. God does not tempt us. And I see every once in a while a verse, there's something on a line that says, God will not give you anything that he won't take you through, or God will take you through anything he gives you. Life gives us stuff. God gives us love, grace, and strength to endure and to get through it. And I mean, it's just like, you remember, if you've read the book of Job, Satan is the one who brings all of this bad stuff, upon Job. God, for whatever reason, allows it to happen. And I think that's partly that, God, showing that God doesn't run us on puppet strings from above, but God doesn't tempt us. I think this, no one when tempted should say, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he tempts no one. He himself tempts no one. And I think that is so important for us to remember. The devil is out there. He's working every day. He's working hard. But God doesn't tempt us. God gives us the strength to look at our temptations and to say to Satan, I can get through this. And this is, what goes on. And verse 14, he says, but one is tempted by his own desire, being lured and enticed by it, and what that desire has conceived gives birth to sin. But, it's not God tempting us. And I can't emphasize that enough, that I 100% believe that God indeed never tempts anyone. God will not give you more than you can handle. Not true either, because, God isn't putting these restrictions in us. God didn't put COVID in the world. God didn't put all of this other stuff out there. It's sin, it's life, it's what it is, but it's not God giving us temptations or giving us troubles, because the will of God is for good things for you and for me. Verse 17 of James 1 says, every generous act of giving with every perfect gift is from above. The goodness that we have comes from God. God created us to be good, and he created us so that when we do good to others, it's an act from God even through us. Verse 22, I've got to talk a little bit about, but be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. Be doers of the word and not merely hearers. Happy birthday, Marsha Bollingberg. I saw that. You had a beautiful start for your day. I don't do I don't greet very many birthday wishers, but I just saw your name pop up. So be a doer of the word, to share God's love and to share God's grace, and just to be aware that that we are God's hands and feet in the world, and to be doers of the word is just to live a good life, a life that gives thanks and praise to God. And I'm just going to close with verse 26 and 27, the last couple verses. If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. So it's, we are to watch our tongues. We are to, we're not supposed to gossip. We're not supposed to slander other people. We're not supposed to, just go on and on and on about all kinds of stuff that way. But we are to be pure and undefiled before God. That's impossible. And we know that. And that's why we have a Lord Jesus Christ, because in Jesus, then we are pure. We can come to God that way. And we need to watch. We need to watch, what we do and how we do it and how we live. And so just, chapter 1 has got lots of admonitions for us as to things to watch for and things to do. But may you be a doer of the word, and may God richly bless you today.